Good morning. This is Bill from Curious Cars and Auto House of Naples on another muggy, shitty, miserable Florida Tuesday. It's really bad this morning. The humidity is thick in the air and it's just beyond unacceptable. And I could get into a 10-minute weather report, but I'm not going to because you already know how it's going to go. And second to that, this is the first AMC that I've probably ever had that I remember, certainly, and probably will be the last one for a while. So we've got an absolute ton of stuff to fit in on this car, and it just won't do for me to go rambling on about the weather. I'm gonna have to be doing it blind because my glasses are fogged up, so I can't see anything. I've just got this vague brown lump in the camera viewfinder, and I'm gonna try and keep it in the center of it, and that's really the best I can do. But all of that said, let's just leap right into AMC. And there you can see the front license plate, which denotes such. So AMC is a very fascinating car company. I mean, without a doubt. I mean, it's a car company that didn't last for very long. It actually was founded only in 1954. And basically ran through, we'll call it 1989. That's when the last of the AMCs were sold off. It was the result of what was then the largest corporate merger in U.S. history. It was a pretty big deal. You're talking about a $200 million merger in 1954, and I guess this amounted to the most that had ever been done. It brought together two companies, Nash Kelvinator, which of course was a fairly large company making cars and other such things, and Hudson, which of course was also a car company. And it was all spearheaded by a guy named George Mason, who conceived of the plot, it said, in the waning days of World War II and after, which is how he came up with the name American Motors. That had been on his mind for some time, but the merger didn't happen for a while after that. And he decided that in order to compete with the big three, the smaller car manufacturers in the United States would have to band together. In fact, after this first merger of Hudson and Nash Kelvinator, the plan was to go on and add Studebaker and Packard as well, but that never happened. Part of the reason that it never happened was because of egos. You had a guy named James Nance. He was running Packard at the time, and if there was going to be a new company, then he was goddamn well going to run it. And of course, George Mason had the same idea, so the two of them clashed, and the second part of the merger just didn't happen. But anyway, the first part did, and as a result, Mr. Mason took over, and he appointed some key people to run the company with him, probably the most notable among them. And God, this bird is going completely apeshit. It was absolutely quiet right up until the moment that I started filming. And then it's like it got a megaphone and just started going nuts. Little bastard. I hope they stay over there. Anyway, Mason he brought in some key people. Key amongst them was a guy named George Romney, who he picked to be vice president. And frankly, this proved to be a pretty good move because in October of '54, just a few months after the merger, George Mason up and dies of pancreatitis. Just gone, dead. I mean, out of the blue, the guy who sort of spearheaded the whole thing. And Romney came in and he took over. And he decided that he was going to come up with the direction that AMC, the new AMC, would take. And he did a pretty damn good job of it, you have to say. In fact, it showed that he had some tremendous leadership skills because he got some talent to stay on that otherwise wouldn't have. I mean, he actually convinced them to take pay cuts, which was shocking. Some of the pretty talented guys at AMC could have just moved on to GM or Ford or whatever. Romney, through his charm, talked them into taking a pay cut and staying on. And all of this paid off. He did away with the Hudson lineup. He did away with the Nash lineup and focused instead on Rambler. Rambler was, how to say it. I mean, it was, look, at the time, people wanted what Romney called dinosaurs, these big, giant, 5,000 pound plus V8 powered cars that, they seemed wasteful, but they were very, very comfortable and people loved them. But Romney decided that there was a big market for people who weren't interested in that kind of thing, and he was proved right. I mean, the Rambler was kind of a smaller, inexpensive, economical car. It was very, very well built, according to reviews at the time. And it proved to be very popular, and it very, very quickly brought AMC into profitability, which it hadn't had for the first couple of years. So Romney succeeded. That said, the Rambler did cost his son a vote later on, which I'll get into in a minute. But they zeroed in on Rambler. They were building them, they were selling them. Everything was working very, very well. And, it was kind of a nerdy way. I mean, you can't say it didn't work, but it was a little bit of a nerdy way for them to make a living. People did like 3 carburetors and 500 horsepower at the time. So coming up with a small alternative, just, I don't know. It doesn't surprise me at all that my dad bought one. And that is exactly what happened. So he went out and bought a Rambler. And despite where I hear they were pretty good cars, apparently my dad's Rambler was a total piece of shit. He hated it and forever held it against George Romney, even to the point that he held it against his son Mitt and claims he didn't vote for him when he ran for president. I'm not sure I believe that, because my dad was more of a diehard GOP guy than anyone I ever met, but he certainly claims that, and for all I know, it could be true. But anyway, the success of the Rambler would prove to be fairly short-term, because eventually Romney left. I mean, everybody thought he was fantastic, so he went on to become the governor of Michigan. When he left, a guy named Roy Abernathy took over, and Abernathy thought that he could take it to the big 3 on their own terms, and so he decided he was going to come out with these dinosaurs that Romney didn't like. So he started making bigger cars, more powerful cars, and I think he brought out the Ambassador, if I remember that correctly, which was a fairly large car at the time. Well, this had short-term success because people did buy them, but it cost them way too much for a little company in terms of their product development. So all of a sudden they find themselves without too much working capital. This harms production, it harms development of the product, and before you know it, AMC is back into problems. They're back into cash flow problems, which of course would be it would be one of the definitive points of their entire existence. They were just basically always in cash flow problems. But anyway, fast forward a few years, they make it through the 50s into the 60s, building a variety of different cars. They start building muscle cars after some other younger, fresher guys take over. You've got the AMX and the Javelin. They're competing to a certain extent with the big 3, and they're doing pretty well, and they've got their own little niche, but still not, doing anything fantastic, and certainly not contributing to giant profits. Where they were still making money was in their smaller car segment. The Gremlin, which they had come out with, proved to be pretty popular and was selling very well, and that was doing good things for them. And then in 1970, they made a brilliant decision, and they bought AM General and Jeep, and it may not have been considered a brilliant decision immediately, but it would certainly become so later on. Anyway, they came out with this Matador in 1971. It was based on the Rambler Rebel, which had been out a few years before. Went through 2 generations of Matador. They started putting money into another small car, which was going to save them, called the Pacer, but it really didn't. They also had the Ambassador going on. Oh boy, I tell you what, let me pause for a minute, collect my thoughts, and keep going again. I'm just dripping. I gotta dry off and wipe my glasses. Give me 1 minute. All right, frankly, I knew I was going to start spazzing out over the whole AMC thing. I'm pretty excited to have an AMC. It's not a car that I've had before. You don't see them very often. They were always much lower production than anything that came from GM or Ford or Chrysler. And it's just rare. So here I am with an AMC, and I'm starting to... I'm starting to go all aflutter. Let me finish the AMC story very quickly, and then we'll just get into the Matador. So AMC had bought Jeep and AM General, which proved to be a pretty good move. Because in 1978, when they were really, really down on their luck and things were going terribly south, they needed an investor. Enter a company called Renault. You may have heard of them. There's the, oh, for the love of God. Make that silent. Anyway, enter a company called Renault. You may have heard of them. They're French, and they, which actually I have to say, of all the car companies that AMC reminds me of, they do remind me of Citroën a little bit for a variety of reasons. The main reason is that if you take an AMC car and look at it, for instance, like this one, it looks like a car that was designed by someone who had heard of a car, and somebody told him what a car was, but he never actually had seen one before. But he was a talented guy, and he drew a car as well described by somebody who had. And that's the way Citroëns have always looked to me, and to some extent AMCs as well, which gets into a guy named Dick Teague, which we'll briefly get into after this. But anyway, 78, Renault comes along. They decide to buy AMC because they want into the U.S. market, and they see AMC and their pretty good production line as a way of getting their small French cars into the market. The Alliance, if you remember that, the Encore, even the Fuego. If you remember the Fuego, that was an interesting car. I had a friend in high school. He was Norwegian. Can't remember his name at the well, I can, but there's no reason to say it. But anyway, he wedged his Fuego between two trees while he was out in the woods, and his parents were pretty pissed off. But that was another story for a later time. But anyway, in comes Renault. They helped develop the Jeep Cherokee XJ, which was probably one of the most, if not the most influential SUVs of all time. And unfortunately, they never really got to capitalize on it fully, which is a shame, which is an absolute shame. But anyway, they developed that. They start selling these Alliances and Encores and whatnot, and things seem to be going pretty well until you get to about 1985, and they're fading out. The American interest in these little French cars is waning. AMC stuff is waning. The Jeep is doing very well unexpectedly and has great promising signs, but it's not there yet. And there's a guy named George Bess, and I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong because he's French. So I'm not even going to try. But anyway, because you get these guys, they're like the news anchors, I mean, they can be from Skokie, and they're telling you the news in this pan-American voice, which just sounds absolutely normal. All of a sudden, they start to say something Spanish, and they sound like Speedy Gonzales. Well, I'm not going to be that guy because I just can't. And by the way, I've always wondered why those newscasters, they do that with Spanish. They never do it with, like, Irish or German. I mean, they're never covering a story about a guy in Ireland, and all of a sudden they say, and today in the news, a guy named Tom O'Reilly. They don't do that. They just only do the Spanish thing, and I've never quite understood that. But so anyway, there it is. I think they should do that for German and for French and for Irish, England, all that stuff. I think they should bring that along too. But anyway, that's an aside. So George Bess is running George Bess is running Renault at the time, and even though the entire company is against him, basically, they all think AMC is a giant money pit. It's never made a profit. It's cost them like $1 billion. He sees hope. He wants the Jeep CJ to come back. It had been killed in a 60 minutes hit piece, as they're wont to do. The Jeep XJ is doing very, very well, and he's going to bring in essentially the Eagle Premier, if you remember that car, and the Eagle Medallion, the full-size and then the mid-size Medallion, and then the Renault Alpine is going to come over as a halo car, like the Corvette, to compete. So Bess has tremendous hopes, and he's fighting the tide at Renault. Well, an assassin's bullet puts an end to that. An organization called Action Directed, which is some far-left terrorist group in France who really hates rich people. They gun him down in front of his house, I want to say in 1986. gone are the hopes for Jeep and whatever else, because the people who are waiting in the wings at Renault decide, the hell with it, we're going to fire sale everything off. We're doing away with the North American market. It's not working for us. We don't have faith in it. So Chrysler swoops in with Lee Iacocca, and they buy the remainder of AMC up for a song. Absolute song. They'd already sold AM General off a while before because the United States government didn't want a military contractor to be French-owned, so that was no longer there. That was gone. But anyway, Jeep was, and that's what Chrysler wanted. They bought it in 1987. They unceremoniously dumped whatever remaining AMC cars were around. The last of them was sold off in '89, and then they took Jeep to new heights, which, of course, has worked very, very well for Chrysler, and it was probably one of the best moves Iacocca ever made. Oh boy, so there it is. There is the short history of how AMC came to fruition and how it came to an end in 1989, and probably the only thing that came from it was Jeep that we all still remember today. So dark clouds were always a part of the AMC issue. Now one can't talk about AMC without bringing up a guy named Dick Teague, and Dick Teague was an incredibly cool car guy, very, very famous, tremendous collector as well, so he grew up in Los Angeles in the he's born in 23. So his mom was an actress of some kind in silent movies. So she had the Hollywood connections. As a result, Teague ends up performing in 5 different Our Gang episodes as a girl, as Dixie Duvall. And, this is probably where the Pacer and Gremlin designs came from, because there's no way that my mom made me be a girl on TV in my youth. That would certainly explain the design of the Pacer and the Gremlin later on. But anyway, Teague was a pretty interesting guy. He went to high school with some real famous hot rodders. He became a hot rodder himself. He became a car guy. He had a thing designing airplanes. Then he got into sort of half-assed designing cars. Then a mentor of his said, hey, you need to go to the design school, which he did. And then he got hired by GM as an apprentice designer. Did very, very well, climbed the ranks at GM, and eventually made his way over to Packard. At Packard, he showed that he could do quite a lot with a little. He could take kind of a limited budget and make a pretty good impression out of it. And this would become the definition of his career, because he moved over to AMC not too long thereafter, and essentially became famous for using AMC's small budget to make the most of a design and create something basically out of nothing. And, one could spend an hour talking about Dick Teague and his impact and what a cool cat he was, but that said, you just can't. I mean, we're in the interest of time. Let me just say the guy was a magician and was able to work with AMC's kind of small, ludicrous budget and turn it into some pretty... I mean, he did stuff like take doors from full-size cars and work them into the design of intermediate cars so they wouldn't have to retool a door. And he did it in a way that nobody noticed, and that's pretty friggin' impressive, you have to say. So just an absolute master of stretching a dollar. And probably his most successful design was the Jeep XJ, which is kind of fascinating because it's not the first one you'd think of him for, but that XJ has become one of the most beloved designs of all time, was probably the most influential SUV of all time, and basically started the entire insane SUV craze that has rocked America ever since its introduction and continues today. So when you see all these little shitty Nissan Rogues and the Hyundai whatevers driving around, you can thank Dick Teague for his work with the Jeep XJ. And in fact, he did a little work he retired in like 85 or 4, which was actually a big blow to AMC at the time. But he came back and did some consultant work for Chrysler later on the Jeep stuff. Anyway, there it is. I'm going to pause again so we can get directly into this particular Matador and a little bit of the Matador lineup. All right, so you have to forgive my strange rambling review to this point. I mean, I know that I'm leaping around the place causing all kinds of confusion. But look, you got to forgive me. I mean, it's a mixture of the coronavirus therapy whiskey, which of course is still going strong, especially with this new Delta thing flying around, so I'm doubling up on that. Then you've got the AMC issue, which I haven't had one before, so I'm kind of excited. You've also got some lunatic birds in the trees, which are really giving me the creeps. And then, of course, the humidity is conspiring to make me drip and fog up my glasses and not really see anything. So you'll just have to forgive that I've got all this, crap rolled into one confusing little review. And but anyway, now let's just get into this thing and we'll get the damn thing over with. So what is a Matador? That was actually the advertisement theme they used when it came out. The Matador replaced the Rebel, it was called, the Rambler Rebel. Which was initially, like every AMC thing, it's always initially successful and then fades very quickly. And you could say the same of the Matador. But anyway, it came out in 1971 and ran for 2 generations. It had sedans, coupes, and wagons. The first generation proved to be fairly successful. But what's interesting is that the sedans, in an age when coupes were all the rage, sedans and wagons did the best for the Matador lineup. In fact, they were widely used by police forces, taxi companies, government agencies, the military. They, for whatever reason, loved it. It was a large car, although it was sold as an intermediate, a mid-size, but it was based on the Ambassador platform, which was full-size. It had a variety of big V8 engines available and was apparently very well made, pretty stable, very durable, and cops absolutely loved it. They loved it. It was the car of choice for the LAPD and a bunch of other police agencies around the country. Even the Dukes of Hazzard used Matador in their first season, used Matador sedans. Livery companies were using the sedans and wagons, but the coupes weren't doing that good. They called it the Flying Brick. I think they ran a few in NASCAR from 71 through 75, and it had limited success, but a guy named Donahue and Bobby Allison would run them. They were prepared by Penske and then run in NASCAR. I think these versions, this Aero version, had a little bit more success. Dick Teague designed, by the way, than the brick ones. But anyway, so the 2 generations, they changed again in 1974, and that's when this came out. And this coupe was a departure, as one could say about many AMC designs. But the main reason it was a departure is it looked absolutely nothing like these sedans and wagons that were also in the Matador lineup. It had these space-age looking headlight pods running back into the hood. It had this swooping fastback design with a low roof line. In fact, there were a lot of complaints about that, these haunches on the rear fenders. It was a very controversial design at the time, beloved and hated by a wide variety of people. Car and Driver, actually, in 74 said it was the best styled car of the year, so they liked it. But not everybody did. It is just one of those kind of love it or hate it designs. Frankly, I love it. When I first saw this car and bought it, I was so excited because not only did I get to have an AMC, which I hadn't had in maybe ever, but I just thought it was one of the best looking cars that I'd seen in a long time, from this era. You've got this big, incredibly cool fastback, this neat little crease around. You've got 4 round taillights in the back, Corvette or Ferrari style. You got this long swooping body line running to the front. And I was chuffed. I was absolutely chuffed. And then my lady friend Tracy, who is a master at deflating me. I mean, she can pop my balloon like nobody else. She looked at a picture of it when I sent it to her and said, "Oh yeah, it looks like a Pinto on steroids." And it just, of course, like everything else she's ever done, just absolutely depresses me. But anyway, there it is. So, immediately in 74, the coupe actually did quite well. It sold more than 30,000 units. It's up against the like the Monte Carlo and the Cutlass, all those cars that we've been doing before. Instead of just one model as before, you could now get it in 3 models. You could get the base coupe, you could get the Brougham, which I believe this one is, and then you could get the X, which was performance oriented. It had a few different engine choices. It had front disc brakes, rear drums, and I just think it was a very radical looking car for the time. and interesting to look at. And I think the race car versions, the NASCAR versions, are pretty damn cool. But they didn't have much money to work with when they made it, so they had to borrow some parts. They used automatic transmissions from Chrysler. It's got a torque flight auto in there. They used a steering box, a collapsible steering box from GM. They used Ford carburetors. But they picked the right parts, and they did it pretty damn well, and it worked good. I mean, good enough anyway. It didn't have nearly the performance of the muscle car stuff they'd come out with earlier, like the Javelin or the AMX. But it was adequate, particularly with the bigger V8s, and worked pretty well. But of course, like everything else, it faded. One fascinating side note, in 1974, there's a movie called The Man with the Golden Gun, a James Bond movie. And God, I watched it as part of my research for this video, which was actually quite fun. I've never been a huge Bond fan, but I don't know what the hell, I'll watch it. Man, what an absolute joy. What an absolute joy to immerse myself in an hour and a half of politically incorrect wonderfulness and fun and joy, the way that movies used to be before everybody became a giant asshole. I have to tell you, it was an absolute joy to watch that film, and I highly recommend it. But anyway, it just made me miss the way that stuff used to be. I mean, we were so lucky. We were so damn lucky, and we didn't even realize it. But anyway, the car in the movie, the bad guy, Francisco Scaramanga, drives a 1974 AMC Matador Coupe. Now, there's enough AMC appearances in that car to make me think that they paid for, some product placement. But that said, this was a very stylish and radical car at the time, and certainly fit the Bond motif. In fact, I think James Bond, Roger Moore, chases him in an AMC Hornet at one point. But anyway, Scaramanga gets away, runs into some giant shed with Hervé Villachez, the guy from Fantasy Island later on, the little small guy. And all of a sudden, which I presume was an accessory you could get at the AMC dealership, is this giant wing setup on top of the Matador with jet engines. The thing bursts out of the shed and flies off into the sunset, leaving Roger Moore on the ground looking kind of miffed and sarcastic. And, he has to go give a hard time to Miss Goodnight to make up for it. So, anyway, probably the most fascinating use of an AMC Matador known to man. But anyway, yeah, it worked for a while. Sales went down from there. AMC started investing in what they thought would save them, which was the Pacer, but it didn't. It did fine, but it didn't save them. And by the time 78 rolled around, I think like 2,000 Matador Coupes got sold. And they had a variety of different trim packages. They had a designer package from some guy, I can't remember his name. And then the Barcelona Coupe, which was absolutely over-the-top ridiculous along the lines of an optioned-out Cordoba. But of course it was the 70s and disco suits and all that sort of thing. So anyway, there it is. And then from that point onward, you get into that Renault thing and the George Best and the eventual demise of AMC. All very much a shame. So I'm going to hit the camera again, dry myself off again, get my crap inside the car, and then we're going to go for a quick drive. Alright, the sun's coming out, which kind of wrecks everything, but I don't even care because now I've taken more coronavirus whiskey. Am I ever safe? And I'm just going to keep going. We're just going to bully through the rest of it. All we have left to do is this specific car. And looking at it here from the back with the 4-round lamps and that fast back and the swooping haunches of the rear quarters, I just think it's a beautiful, beautiful design. I really have to hand it to Dick Teague. It makes me wonder what AMC could have done if they'd had any real money to work with at the time. I mean, this thing could have been epic. If it cost another $1,000 and had some more content and was, a little bit better engineered, what a machine it could have been. Because frankly, it wasn't that bad for what they had to deal with. And it makes a terrific collectible now because you're just not going to see any other ones. I mean, you go to a car show, there's 20 Chevelles. There's no Matadors. I mean, there's not one. Chances are slim anyway. So you get something like this and you're going to stand out, and I think that's cool. And of course, the styling is now so dated that whether it's fresh or not doesn't really matter. People like it, and it's a lot of fun to drive around. Anyway, we'll start inside the trunk. I like the little tap down at the top too. I think that's cool. Okay, there you have a spare tire situated properly where it should be, nicely bolted down. Sorry for my crap in there. You see the trunk is not beautifully finished. You've got kind of cheapy little carpet in there. But of course that was probably all part of AMC's cost cutting at the time. Condition wise, it looks to be in pretty good shape. Everything nice and tight and solid. And you know, a nice size. If you remember Miss Goodnight and James Bond, she fit in the back of one of these trunks very properly, but I imagine that they probably pulled out the spare tire to make her a little bit more comfortable. I also remember when she opened the trunk while the thing was in flight, she had a bit of a scare as a result, and yeah, who wouldn't? So anyway, there's a very nice proper trunk that one would expect in any car. I tell you what, I like the way that the 5-mile-an-hour bumpers on these are on struts that come out of the body. Not unlike a Beetle, if you will. And one of the reasons that I like that is it lends itself to the idea of those being removed. In fact, if you had a couple of holes there in the back where the struts came through, you could run the exhaust out, and I think that would look pretty neat. I've also seen other Matadors on the web where they remove the front bumper, and it looks terrific without it. So, yeah, you know, I don't know if that was for cheapness of design or what reason they did it, but I think it's a benefit now because it just looks cool. Obviously this does not have the original rims. It's got these big 5-star looking torque thrust American racing things. Generally I'm not a fan of them, but I do actually think they lend themselves well to this particular car. I don't know if it's a ride height thing or they're not too shiny or, you know, whatever the reason is, but from the beginning I didn't mind them, and I just, you know, that's out of character for me. Usually I just want factory wheels on everything. Have a look under the hood. All right, so AMC engine offerings were pretty prolific, at least in 1974. Oh, God, and probably 1975 as well. But they had 2 different V6s and then 4 versions of the V8. So you could get a small V6, a slightly larger V6. Then you could get this, the 304. You could get a 304 2-barrel. Actually, I'm not sure if this is a 2-barrel or a 4-barrel, so let's find out really quick. This is the kind of crap I should know before we do the video. And we'll find out together. Alright, so this is a 2-barrel. You could get the 2-barrel or the 4-barrel version. Again, remember those are Ford carburetors. And then you could get the, the 401, which very few people opted for because 74, 75 was all about fuel mileage. So those are pretty rare, and mostly the 401 just showed up in government and police cars and such, and the sedans mostly. But a few coupes were made with that. In either a 2-barrel or 4-barrel version. So tons of engines you could get in these cars. You could get a manual gearbox with the 6s. I think the 8s all came with the torque flights. And anyway, everything nice and proper under here. You can see all the weirdness. Like, what is this big area here? It's actually quite nice if you're working on the car because it's like a built-in place to rest your tools. But I've never seen anything like that on any other car, and it goes back to that AMC Citroën thing, where it's just not like anything else that I know of. And I do love those big round lights in the front with the pods and the way it works with the hood. I don't know. I just think that looks really cool. There you can also see the way the front bumper comes out on struts, if you will, and that those are pretty easy to remove. I'll put in a picture of one that I saw on the web without the front bumper because I thought it looked cool, and it's something I'd consider doing if I owned one of these. But anyway, everything nice and proper and original under there. This year had the upgraded ignition that they were putting on cars, an electronic ignition, which worked pretty well, and otherwise everything nice. You can also see that GM power steering pump reservoir. It looks very much like the one that was on my 79 Firebird, and of course that's how AMC kept going at the time. I also like that it uses a dual hood latch system, not unlike Mercedes. Ow, God. God, that hurt. Like the full vinyl top. The back window, that absolutely cool. And here's something else that's neat about it. It's not fixed. Actually rolls down about 3/4 of the way, so your Canadians in the back seat are going to be pretty chipper with ventilation. I've been getting a couple of questions. I guess I haven't explained it in a while about the Canadian in the back seat thing, so let me very quickly bring that up as I dry off the drippy drip from the car. You know, when I was selling cars a few years ago, quite a few of the cars that we sold went to condo people, meaning people who, you know, came down from other places. They either rented or bought a small condo in Naples and wanted to have a car to drive around in. The Canadians were, you know, a pretty good percentage of them, as were Germans, as were Northeasterners and such. But the Canadians would buy, I didn't care what car they bought, Mini Coopers, MGs, SLs, you name it. Didn't matter. When their Canadian friends would come to visit, they would stuff as many of them in the back seat as possible. So you'd see this Mini Cooper with like 3 big Canadians in the back, and it looked ridiculous. And as far as I could tell, no other nationality would do this. None of them stuffed people inside the way that the Canadians did. So that is where that ridiculous Canadian in the backseat thing came from, and I stick to it. It's just apparently something they do. So anyway, I can see the sun's out and killing everything inside. I'm going to pull the car forward into the shade and pick it up again in 1 minute. All right, that's a little better. So the sun's still out, but we got a little bit of shade inside. In the back seat, you can see more weirdness. You can see the dome light is between the seats for no good reason. There's no dome light up on top at all. That is your interior light. You see the back shelf there with the ventilation, the speaker holes, and of course the window cranks and ashtrays, which you would have needed in the 70s. And again, you know, given leg room, I think your Canadians would be fairly chipper, although headroom is kind of shitty, so yeah, maybe not thrilled. These are weird. It's got little detachable pockets on the door panels. Why they detach, I have absolutely no idea what the benefit of that is, but I'm sure somebody can tell me. It's all very nice, tight, original, everything looking pretty good. Strange door lock mechanism. You push down here, pull up. Again, you know, AMC, not something I had much experience with, and this car is a bit of a learning experience for me. As is the switch. I haven't looked at the owner's manual, but we've got a 3-way switch here, and I'm not entirely sure what it runs. And I wish I'd looked that up before to know, because honestly, I just don't have a friggin' clue. But there it is. Let's hop in, fire this thing up, get the windows down. Don't have the AC working yet, so it's hot as balls. Tried to get it going yesterday, but just couldn't get it in the shop. And what's irritating is it was sold to me as working, so I'm sure it's not going to take much. But in the moment, I'm just suffering without it. So anyway, you can hear that 301 just, 304, sorry, just sounds very proper. It feels like it's going through some kind of turbo mufflers. You've got 3 square gauges, which were thought of as pretty modern at the time. There you see just 64,000 miles on the clock, which is believed to be original in this car. You got your light switch, you got your wipers, which I believe have intermittent and washers. You've got your fuel gauge, temp gauge, and of course some warning lights. And then over here you have an inoperative clock, so I suppose that's not too weird. There you have a column shift for the torque flight. You've got cruise control, which is a nice option on this car, being the Brougham model. You've got your cigarette lighter here, and you've got an AM/FM stereo, which seems to be working pretty good. New sunglasses, 'cause you ditched but of course it's very good at tuning and advertisements. And then you've got a nice big ashtray down there, and a rather huge transmission hump, and this sort of split bench seat setup. So yeah, everything looking pretty nice. The original sun visors, and that one has a mirror. So anyway, let's go for a spin. Actually, the sun's out. It's going to be crap. I'm going to pause it, and then we'll pick it up at the end of the road, and I won't make you wait through Peter's Gate. It has decent throttle response, but it's far from a race car. You know, I don't know if it's the gearing or what, but even with that big 401, they didn't coax much performance out of it. I want to say the quarter mile time was in the 16s. Definitely could have been quicker for the era. But that said, it's of course a V8, it's a torque flight, so it's good enough. It's a great cruiser. And man, it feels nice to drive. The steering feels a little bit over-assisted. The brakes are a little bit mushy, but they're good enough, and the discs help. And it's just a nice car to steer down the road. You also get a lot of thumbs up, and a lot of people looking, wondering what exactly the hell this thing is. As I'm telling you, not many people have seen a Matador in the last 30 years or so. I should have put the back windows down for maximum ventilation, but anyway, there it is. So, you know, kick down. That's good enough. It gets up and moves. You know, it could have definitely used a 4-barrel there. Maybe if I owned this thing, I'd put on a 4-barrel, but there is a certain niceness with keeping the engine all original. Man, does it drive nice, and it feels big inside. And of course, it was based essentially on the full-sized Ambassador. They just shortened it. I don't know if they made it less wide, and they probably didn't, which is why it feels like there's so much room, you know, for the passenger. But thank God there's no center console, so you can get nice and snug with your honey if you decide to go to a drive-in movie. Must have been fascinating in your Matador to go to a Bond drive-in in 1974 and watch your car fly off into the sunset. So anyway, also because I'm not going to raise the window, I'm not going to bother with the highway cruise. I also don't know much about the tires, although I guess on these AR rims they can't be that old, but with the windows down, it's just going to sound like you know, I'm inside a wind tunnel, so there's just no point to it. It'll be ridiculous. But I can tell you the car is a very nice cruiser, very smooth steering wheel, runs good at 60, 65, which I've been going on these surface streets, and nice response from the motor. And there it is. So, you know, you can't say that in 1975 this was just another coupe in a long offering of coupes. I mean, it was definitely radically different, at least in terms of styling, than just about anything else you were going to find out there. And at least for a very short while, that seemed to appeal to people. But, you know, like every other story with AMC cars, the initial fad sort of faded away, and the sales went to crap, and the money got tight, and they had to figure out a way to survive. And that is the summed up history of AMC from the beginning to the end. Kind of a shame. Would have been nice if they'd kept going. Who knows what they'd be doing now? You know, they always built stuff that was, you know, until they started taking it right to GM, and they built stuff that was different and outside the box. It worked well for them. You know, they came up with those Eagle four-wheel drive SUVs before anyone else was doing anything like that. If you remember those cars, there was one in the AMC Eagle. There was one in Back to the Future. I think the broad that Michael J. Fox was dating, her dad had one, and they were neat. I still want one of those things, but haven't seen a good one in a while, and, you know, I haven't been able to buy one, but someday I will. But anyway, neat car company, and I'm very happy to have an AMC to finally talk about them a little bit, and with any luck, we'll get a chance to do it again. So thank you very much for having a look. Really appreciate it. And we will see you with the next one. Take care.